I'm glad you guys are out here again this week.
Yeah, good to see you, Pastor John.
It is a good week. Are we ready for, boy, we're almost done with our sections of Romans. What have we come up with this week?
Yeah, we were kind of...
I was thinking ahead a little bit, and a word kind of stuck out to me, or I don't quite understand what it means, predestined. So does that mean everything is already planned out, everything is mapped out?
Yeah, I've heard people use predestination to talk about how everything that happens, every little tiny little thing, God somehow mapped out exactly. This is going to happen. You're going to trip and fall.
You had talked about, you heard a tweet, I think, where a pastor said something.
Yeah, I did a really smart thing when I was looking through Twitter. Always.
Was that tongue-in-cheek?
Yeah,
okay.
Very tongue-in-cheek. And yeah, there was a pastor that had written something to the effect of that God created COVID and sent it to the United States to bring the country back to the church somehow.
That's curious. I think we've been 6 months in COVID, and I don't see people coming back to the church just yet. I think
me neither.
I still see people a little bit afraid, and I'm thankful for everybody who is working towards it. But I would hate to think that God dumped COVID on us just to try and test us. Maybe what we should do is look at what Paul says about predestined and just try to play with that. We're at Romans 8, and today we're doing 6:28 through 30. Mm-hmm. So we could just start at 6:28. 8:28. Thank you. Yeah, Romans 8:28. So, Kate, do you want to read that first?
Sure. And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love Him, who have been called according to His purpose.
Oh, hold on. I have heard that passage so maligned, so misused. We know that in all things God works for the good for those who love Him. In fact, I've heard people say, and I think they're thinking of this passage, well, it's all part of God's plan. In fact, I had somebody that said that at a funeral with somebody who had just died. It's all part of God's plan. And I registered the shock of the people who were close to that person who died. Have you heard it misused like that too?
Yeah, I mean, I've definitely heard people say something along the lines of using this passage where they say basically, if you just believe the right things, if you just trusted God enough, then, well, that bad thing that happened to you wouldn't have happened. It's because your fault, basically, for not trusting God. And just, oh man, that's...
Kate, have you heard something like that?
Yeah, like it will all work out in the end.
Oh, it'll all work out in the end. Yeah, which, when you're struggling and you're in the midst of the struggle,
it's not very helpful.
It isn't very helpful. And
we can say God works for good, right? But not necessarily.
We can say God works for good, and even I've heard the old story of Joseph way back in Genesis 50, where I've heard this kind of connected with this, that they intended it for bad, but God intended it for good, as though somehow God just intended all this stuff to really happen. Is that what this really says? Maybe we need to look back at the passage. Well, I think when we were exploring this, we also came out with a footnote to it. And maybe we need to start just a little bit earlier, where we hear and remember that last week, God is not, He is not sitting back and just watching things from a distance as though He isn't involved in it. Because last week we heard that the Spirit searches our hearts, and the Spirit wants to know and intercede for God people, that the Spirit is working with us in verse 27. And Kate, do you want to read verse 28 again, but with that footnote that we found?
Sure. And we know that in all things God works together with those who love Him to bring about what is good with those who have been called according to His purpose.
Oh, that's nice. Because those God foreknew, he also, here's your word, predestined to be conformed to the image of his Son, that he might be the firstborn among many brothers and sisters. Micah, do you want to take that last?
Yeah. And those whom he predestined, he also called. And those whom he called, he also justified. And those whom he justified, he also glorified.
To me, it sounds like God is working continually through conforming, and that in fact God does not want any of us to feel as though somehow we're left out. You know, sometimes when bad stuff happens, we tend to think that we're being judged, and
That God is punishing us. God is acting in an evil way.
yeah, but we have to remember something. What is that again that we have to remember? Kate, it's your
We
line.
feel condemned.
There is now no condemnation.
Okay, we have to have you remember that always. Okay. But sometimes when struggles happen, that's the first reaction we have, is that somehow God is judging us or that we're condemned. And instead, this says that God is conforming us. It doesn't say that God is predestined to everything that's happened. It says more that God is predestined to conform us to the image of his Son.
And what image did his Son take?
Oh, the image of love. But the image also of dying and rising, the image of redemption. Yeah.
Yeah, so maybe if there is any predestination, it's that God loved us
That's the predestination.
and God
Redeems us.
Whoop. Looks like we're going through our
Mm-hmm.
words. Yeah. That the predestined is that God does not want us to feel forbidden, but called. Yeah. And that God does not want us to feel that everything that happens to us is
Unfair.
but that
Fair.
in fact it fits within his Son's work. Look at this, all these words that we've been hanging on the cross, that God doesn't want us to feel separated from us by the nature of struggles that we have to go through, but in fact that we are both united with him, and we are not abandoned in our struggle, but
Adopted.
yeah, I got a whole host of words.
We can
It looks
keep
they're all
going, we can
coming
keep
in.
going.
Yeah, I'm
We're
not a
not
slave to my situation, but
we serve with God.
yeah. Or, nor am I, because struggles are happening inside of me, an enemy of God, but,
A friend of God.
and that all of this works through God's gift, and that I am not dying in my situation.
There is no condemnation.
You bang that. Because you may feel like a sinner, but you really are a saint. That's right. And all of this works together in gospel. You know
Good
what this tells me is that God does work through all these situations. But I may not see how it all is going to fit together. But God works
With us.
In us.
and
Through us.
through us. And that's with you too, neighbor.
See you later, neighbor.